All right, everyone, welcome. Today, we're diving into Mark B. Matthews' False Authority and the True Believer. Now, this book, it isn't just theory. It's this raw, incredibly personal story from a guy who lived on the absolute extremes of belief and then documented his entire journey out. For our book club, I think this is a really powerful look at the psychology that drives fanaticism and, more importantly, the path toward a more genuine, authentic faith.
Matthews kicks the whole thing off with this quote from the philosopher Eric Hoffer, and honestly, it just perfectly sets the stage. Right away, it kind of forces you to look inward, to think about your own self-deceptions before you even start looking at the world around you.
And that really is the core question of the whole book, isn't it? It takes that big philosophical idea and makes it intensely personal. The argument is that our own misery, and maybe even our ability to cause harm, is tied directly to the stories we tell ourselves.
So let's dive in. Here's the journey we're going to take, following the author's path. We'll start by trying to understand this hunger of the believer. Then we'll look at the prison of should be that keeps people trapped. From there, we'll see the collapse into grace, find freedom in the yoke, and then learn the daily work of crucifying the false authority. And finally, see what it looks like to rise above the battlefield.
Okay, first up, the hunger of the believer. We've got to understand the raw material, what fanaticism is actually made of.
So, who exactly is this true believer? Well, Matthews argues it's not just someone with really strong beliefs. No, it's a very specific psychological profile. It's born from this deep, aching loneliness and this desperate, hungry search for an identity. You can almost think of it like a gaping wound that's just looking for a cause to attach itself to give it some kind of meaning.
And this hunger, it shows up as an addiction to intensity itself. Matthews talks about his own life as just one all-in obsession after another, jumping from religion to politics to causes to romance. But here's the key insight. The specific person or the cause was never the real point. The drug was the feeling of high-stakes, all-consuming intensity. That was the addiction.
So, okay, how does this need for intensity actually trap someone? Well, that brings us to the prison of should be. This is really the engine of the true believer's suffering.
This slide really breaks down the book's main pivot point. On one side, you've got the ego's demand. The world should be this way. People should be that way. It's a constant resistance to reality, and it just breeds anger and suffering. But the path to freedom, he says, is this subtle shift to ought to. This means first you accept reality for what it is, and only then do you ask, okay, given this situation, how ought I to respond? It's a total game changer.
And this is why that should-be mindset is so, well, addictive, really. When you're constantly furious that the world isn't as it should be, that anger gives you a mission. It gives you a sense of purpose, even if that purpose is built completely on fighting something, on hatred.
You know, you can't fight reality forever. It's just not sustainable. Eventually, it all has to come crashing down. It leads to collapse. But for Matthews, this isn't the end of the story. It's actually a necessary and, in a strange way, graceful new beginning.
And, when he talks about collapse, he's not kidding. He just comes right out and says it. He robbed a bank, not really for the money, but as a desperate escape. It was his ripcord, his escape hatch from the burning airplane of his own life.
After prison, that downward spiral just got faster. He took all that same intensity and just pointed it at political rage. The target changed, but the pattern was exactly the same. And it led to this moment of just total self-destruction. His whole life, built on this foundation of anger, just completely imploded.
And it was in that wreckage that he finally saw it clearly. He realized the enemy was never the political party or the culture or society. The entire war, this whole time, was a war he was fighting with his own soul.
This is the huge revelation. The enemy he'd been fighting his whole life was this internal, false authority. This one thing just wore a bunch of different masks. Sometimes it looked political, sometimes religious, sometimes romantic, but it was always the same source. It was the ego, demanding that the world bend to its will. Same demon, just different disguises.
So, once you realize the enemy is inside you, well, the whole game changes. The solution has to change too, and this brings us to this idea of finding freedom in the yoke.
Matthews completely reframes the yoke of Christ. He says, look, it's not a symbol of being a servant or a slave. It's a tool for shared work. Picture two oxen yoked together to pull a plow. Christ is the master ox, the strong one, taking almost all the weight. Your job as the disciple isn't to pull the whole load yourself. It's just to stay in alignment with him. It's a partnership, not slavery. And this idea gets even deeper when you compare it to political or social movements. As you can see here, movements give you direction, sure, but they often do it by taking away your personal responsibility. They just want followers. The yoke, in this model, gives you direction with responsibility. The whole point is to create mature disciples, not just obedient slaves.
But here's the thing. This freedom isn't a one-and-done deal. It's not a graduation. It requires a daily, deliberate practice. This is what he calls the work of crucifying the false authority.
The author lays out this stark, simple, daily discipline. He says that false authority, your ego, it wakes up every single morning demanding to be in charge. And the disciple's job is laid out right here. Find it, drag it to the cross, crucify it, and then get up and do it all over again tomorrow, every single day.
And this is such a radical way to look at it. The cross isn't just a piece of jewelry. It's not some poetic metaphor for having a hard time. In this context, it is a tool. It's an execution device used for one specific purpose: the daily death of the ego.
So what happens when you do this every day? What's the payoff? It's a complete shift in how you see everything. You move from being a soldier down in the mud of the battlefield to being an observer, watching from above. You go from fanatic to mystic. Matthews gives us this really useful model. Think of it like a psychological pyramid. He says most of us spend our entire lives trapped on the bottom floor, just bouncing back and forth between two corners: the skeptic who's eaten up by doubt, and the believer who clings blindly to certainty.
And here is the way out. Above that whole battlefield of belief versus doubt, there's a third point at the top of the pyramid: the mystic, the peaceful observer. This isn't about finding a happy medium between the two. It's about rising above them, transcending the conflict entirely, because you see that the conflict itself is the trap. You're still engaged with the world, but you are no longer enslaved by its outcomes.
And the book leaves us with this challenge. It suggests that all these endless battles we fight for the world are maybe just a distraction from the one battle that truly matters. The real war, the real victory, is internal. And I think that's a powerful question to kick off our discussion here in the book club. After seeing this map of the inner world, where do we each begin our own work?